Okay, picture this for a second. You already know all about Jon Snow, right? You know about Daenerys Targaryen, and you absolutely know about that brutal, relentless war for the Iron Throne. But what if I told you that literally everything you know about the Game of Thrones is just one tiny, bloody chapter in a massive history? And I'm not talking about a few generations. I'm talking about a sprawling, 12,000-year history. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are going all the way back to the very beginning. We're going to explore the complete, sweeping history of Westeros, starting from the ancient Dawn Age all the way to the apocalyptic Doom of Valyria. We'll be tracking the Mad Kings, the Flying Dragons, and those terrifying world-ending winters. Honestly, this is the ultimate cycle of ice and fire, and we are going to break the whole thing down for you right here, right now.
Okay, let's dive into this and lay out our roadmap for today. We're going to start off with the primordial Dawn Age, then we'll move across the sea to Valyria and the Andal invasions, chart out Aegon's brutal conquest, witness the tragic fall of the dragons, and finally, arrive right at the events that set the stage for the Game of Thrones itself.
So let's start with Section 1, the Dawn Age. We are winding the clock way back 12,000 years to an era completely untouched by humans, ruled by giants and the children of the forest.
Now, things in this era escalated incredibly rapidly. Around 12,000 BC, a human ethnic group coming from Essos, known as the First Men, invaded. And this wasn't a quick skirmish. They fought for 2 entire millennia, 2,000 years of war. It wasn't until 10,000 BC that they finally reached a standstill and signed a peace treaty called the Pact. This actually ushered in a really beautiful golden era known as the Age of Heroes, but as you can probably guess with Westeros, that peace was never going to last. By 8000 BC, the world practically ended.
To really understand how we got to that point, we have to look back at that initial clash between these two forces. You see, in a totally desperate, terrifying move to stop the human invasion, the Children of the Forest turned to deep magic and obsidian. They used a massive spell known as the Hammer of the Waters to literally shatter the land bridge that connected Westeros to Essos. Just imagine the sheer scale of that. But opposing them were the First Men, and they were armed with unstoppable bronze weapons and just absolutely overwhelming numbers. Ultimately, humanity pushed deep into the continent, which eventually forced that peaceful pact. But like I mentioned, that peace was totally shattered by something infinitely worse than human invaders.
I want you to imagine a generation of total apocalyptic darkness. No sun, just endless, freezing cold. This was the Long Night. It was an endless winter where these terrifying creatures, the White Walkers, invaded from the uttermost north, and they just marched south, mercilessly slaughtering everything in their path and raising the dead to serve as their horrific army. Humanity literally only survived through the legendary Battle for the Dawn, desperately pushing those ice demons back using dragonglass. And to make sure the realm was forever protected from that happening again, a legendary figure named Bran the Builder, aided by giants and ancient magic, raised the wall. This wasn't just a fence, it was a colossal 700-foot fortification of solid ice. Let that sink in. 700 feet.
And that brings us to Section 2, Valyria and the Andals. We're transitioning the narrative across the narrow sea to Essos, where religious zealots and dragon lords are about to change the world forever.
So while Westeros is recovering from the Long Night, a brand new wave of invaders hit the shores, the Andals. And they were fired up by a brand new religion, the Faith of the Seven, and armed with vastly superior forged steel. They violently overwhelmed the First Men. For centuries, these Andals waged a brutal holy war, actively chopping down the sacred weirwood trees and managing to conquer 6 of the 7 southern kingdoms. The absolutely crucial point to remember here is that only the north remained completely unconquered, and they only survived thanks to the impenetrable swampy fortress known as Moat Cailin.
Meanwhile, back over in Essos, something completely unbelievable was happening. Peaceful sheep herders somehow stumbled upon actual dragons layering in a massive volcanic chain called the 14 Flames. Using intense blood magic, they managed to tame these beasts and forge the Valyrian freehold. I mean, just picture this cinematically for a second. A magical empire with topless towers reaching straight up into the clouds, warriors wielding legendary Valyrian steel swords, and skies just completely filled with dragons. They used this unparalleled, godlike power to utterly annihilate their rivals. They destroyed the Giscari Empire with dragon flame and literally salted their fields so nothing would ever grow there again.
And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer scale of the terror they inspired. 10,000.
That is the number of ships the warrior queen Nymeria needed when the Valyrian freehold finally turned its dragons against her people. After a 250,000-strong Rhoynish army, yes, 250,000 soldiers was completely annihilated by dragonfire, Nymeria saw the writing on the wall. She knew it was over. So she packed every surviving member of her people onto 10,000 ships, fled across the sea to Dorne in Westeros, unified the entire land, and established House Martell.
But you know, the greatest empire in the world couldn't last forever. In 102 BC, the catastrophic Doom of Valyria struck. Heavy volcanic and seismic activity quite literally shattered the entire peninsula to pieces. The great city of Valyria was instantly laid to waste, and the dragons were virtually wiped off the face of the earth. In fact, the only reason we even have dragons later in this story is because a young girl named Daenerys the Dreamer foresaw this exact terrifying catastrophe 12 years earlier. Her vision forced her family, the Targaryens, to flee to the island fortress of Dragonstone just in the nick of time.
Which shifts our focus perfectly back to Westeros for Section 3, Aegon's Conquest. The surviving Targaryens decide it's time to claim a massive new empire.
3. That is the number you really need to remember here. At this time, Westeros was a massive, fiercely divided continent of 7 separate kingdoms. But Aegon the Conqueror only needed 3 massive dragons, led by the absolutely colossal Balerion the Black Dread, to bring the entire continent to its knees. In a span of just 2 years, Aegon subdued 6 of the 7 kingdoms, melted down the very swords of his defeated enemies to forge the Iron Throne, and built a brand new capital city at King's Landing. Out of everyone, only Dorne successfully resisted, bleeding the Targaryen armies dry in their brutal, unforgiving deserts.
So, let's move quickly through the chaotic aftermath of that conquest, because it unfolded over decades. Aegon's conquest officially finished up around 2 BC. Shortly after that, the realm heavily suffered under the incredibly brutal reign of Maegor the Cruel, who slaughtered thousands. But then, King Jaehaerys the Conciliator took over in 48 AC, and he brought in decades of a truly golden age of peace and prosperity. However, as we always see, secession is an absolute poison. By 129 AC, all of that golden peace was torn to shreds by a devastating civil war known as the Dance of the Dragons.
And that brings us to Section 4, the Fall of the Dragons. Without any massive external enemies left to fight, the Targaryens turned their fire and blood inward.
The Dance of the Dragons was just an absolute, heartbreaking tragedy. It pitted brother against sister in a vicious war for the Iron Throne, and in the process of fighting each other, they managed to kill off almost all of their remaining dragons. By 153 AC, the very last living dragon took its final breath. The Targaryens had officially lost their ultimate weapon. They were totally crippled as a dynasty, left with absolutely nothing but stone eggs that stubbornly, frustratingly refused to hatch.
And because of that weakness, the realm bled for decades. Starting in 1960 AC, a relentless string of legitimized bastards from the royal bloodline repeatedly tried to rise up and seize the Iron Throne. We know these as the Blackfyre Rebellions. It was just this rapid-fire series of bloody, brutal civil wars that featured epic-scale battles, legendary knights, and the famously fierce mercenary army known as the Golden Company. And this constant, looming threat didn't truly end until all the way in 260 AC.
But through all of this, the Targaryens never, ever stopped obsessing over what they had lost. And tragically, that obsession proved to be deadly. In 259 AC, King Aegon V attempted to hatch the last 3 remaining dragon eggs using dark magic and highly volatile wildfire at their summer palace. It was a total, unmitigated catastrophe. The fire raged completely out of control, ultimately killing the king himself. History remembers this as the Tragedy of Summerhall. But the really dark, tragic irony of this whole event, right as the flames were actively consuming the royal family, a baby was born amid the smoke and the ash, Prince Rhaegar Targaryen.
Which finally brings us to Section 5, the Game of Thrones. We are building the energy here because we have finally arrived at the exact events that set the stage for the modern era of Westeros.
Let's move to this and see exactly how it builds, step by brutal step. The whole thing kicks off at the Harrenhal tourney in 281 AC. Here, Prince Rhaegar publicly shames his own wife by crowning Lyanna Stark instead. Then, Rhaegar straight-up abducts Lyanna. When her father and brother go to the king to demand justice, the Mad King Aerys violently burns them alive. That single act totally breaks the realm, sparking a massive, continent-wide rebellion led by houses Stark, Arryn, and Baratheon. This all violently culminates at the Battle of the Trident, where Robert Baratheon literally crushes Rhaegar's chest with a warhammer. Finally, the Lannisters sack King's Landing, Sir Jaime Lannister slays the Mad King to stop him from burning the entire city to the ground, and Robert firmly takes the Iron Throne.
Which brings us to the pivotal year of 298 AC. King Robert's reign was actually relatively peaceful right up until this specific year. In 298, the hand of the king, Jon Arryn, is poisoned. King Robert himself dies shortly after that. This single, targeted assassination completely fractures the entire realm once again, plunging the Seven Kingdoms headfirst into the devastating, incredibly chaotic conflict known as the War of the Five Kings.
And honestly, here lies the grand, tragic irony of Westeros. While all these human lords are busy bleeding the country dry, fighting their petty political squabbles over a metal chair made of rusty swords, the true threat is waking up. Across the sea, Daenerys Targaryen has done the impossible and hatched 3 living dragons. And even worse, far to the north, way beyond that giant ice wall, the White Walkers have officially returned from the dark, and they are bringing the cold with them.
So the absolutely crucial question we have to leave you with today is this. With winter finally here, does it really matter who sits on a chair of swords when the true enemy comes from the dark? The history of Westeros constantly proves that power is really just a shadow on the wall, and this entire world is trapped in a relentless, bloody cycle of ice and fire. I really hope this deep dive helped you grasp the massive, sweeping scale of this incredible history. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep exploring the deep history behind the stories you love. See you next time.